What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers prepare for a game to end the regular season against the Cincinnati Bengals, but there are plenty of headlines surrounding them. We're diving into, obviously, the Week 18 schedule and what it could mean and how the Pittsburgh Steelers may be in a situation that, well, takes a lot of pressure off them by the time kickoff starts. Meanwhile, they could travel overseas next season, and that is obviously exciting. We have some intel about who they may play in that game. Former Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers legend, had some interesting things to say about the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback situation, some possible changes the Steelers could make this week, and a massive George Pickens trade that one Pittsburgh Steelers reporter believes is a possibility this offseason. I hope everybody is gearing up for New Year's, enjoying some extra time off of work. Nick, how you feeling, my friend?
Feeling pretty good. It is that weird week between Christmas and New Year's where you're like, what do we do? And to make it even weirder, the Steelers, obviously, as we'll talk about, are not playing on Sunday. So, I mean, just throwing us all in a blender, especially with the last 3 weeks, the fact that they played on a Sunday, then a Saturday, then a Wednesday. Of course, they're not going to go back to playing on a Sunday. So it's the schedule's all over the place, but, feeling pretty good. The sun is shining, and we're obviously both back in our initial studios.
Yes. It felt good to be back. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's always strange to be out of the studio doing a podcast, especially when, like I do it in my parents', like it's almost like a closet. And I'm just sitting there, you're in the corner of a random house where I know people are staring at you. It's good to be back. It's good to be back. And we are excited. It is a strange week, and that is where we will kick things off. Plenty of news and notes this morning. Nick, what do we got?
Yeah, let's kick it off with the thing that's going to affect the Steelers the most, which is their Week 18 schedule. After everything has come down in the AFC to Week 18, the Steelers and the Ravens will both play on Saturday, with the Ravens kicking off action at 4:30 against the Cleveland Browns, and the Steelers heading back to primetime, 8 o'clock p.m. Saturday night against the Cincinnati Bengals. Of course, the Steelers need a win and a Baltimore loss to clinch the AFC North.
It doesn't make any sense, to be honest with you, for the Pittsburgh Steelers to be in primetime, but that's the spot that they were given. I thought that the Baltimore Ravens, Cleveland Browns would take the night game. The Pittsburgh Steelers, Cincinnati Bengals would take the 4 p.m. game or the 4:30 game, and that would make a lot more sense for the NFL. It allows the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Cincinnati Bengals to win that one, and then the AFC North comes down to Baltimore, Cleveland, which brings up the question, and everybody's going to be asking it. If the Ravens win, do the Pittsburgh Steelers pack it in and say, we're good? Well, the Pittsburgh Steelers can still fall behind the Los Angeles Chargers, and obviously they don't want to do that. So they will still play their starters in this one, looking for a win. And, well, the Cincinnati Bengals are a tough team right now. They are on a winning streak. They're playing for a playoff spot in this one. I would say it is no easy game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a game that a couple of weeks ago looked like, okay, well, if you're in a slump, this is a place where you're going to get out of it before the postseason. Now it's looking like the Steelers need to win this one, because if they don't, the questions are massive. And at the same time, the Bengals are no easy game heading into the postseason. It won't change much for the Steelers. They obviously won't be fighting for the AFC North, but they'll still be fighting to maintain that 5 seed in the AFC wildcard round with a win over Cincinnati. So that won't change. And yes, you will get people that say, well, who cares about the 5th or the 6th seed? The 5th or the 6th seed decides going to Houston or Baltimore. The Pittsburgh Steelers would obviously rather go to Houston. So because of that, they will still be fighting for that 5 seed. The Steelers, while it doesn't make sense, we'll keep those starters in.
Let's jump over to next year's schedule with a little bit of news that might excite you, obviously, of an international traveler yourself. The Pittsburgh Steelers, according to Post-Gazette's Jerry Dulac, might be heading to Ireland next season, and poor sources on your end might be playing the Green Bay Packers in a Super Bowl rematch. This will be the Steelers' first international game, if it does happen, since 2013.
Yeah, so I heard last night, I've heard for a while that the Pittsburgh Steelers are most likely going to play an international game in 2025. Dublin made all the sense in the world with the Pittsburgh Steelers connections over there and the NFL trying to get to Ireland. This is a chance for them to send a national brand. I'll say a couple of things. So this probably eliminates both Christmas and Thanksgiving games, which is huge for anybody who does not want to work and or cover a game or watch a game on Thanksgiving or Christmas. Those are the big ones. They'll go instead. It'll be a home game, which kind of stinks. That takes away from one game at Acrisure Stadium, and the fans are obviously not real big on missing those home games. But at the same time, it'll still be a cool experience. I personally am super excited to spend a week in Dublin, Ireland. I mean, I've heard there's nothing to do over there except for drink Guinness, and I mean, nobody's complaining if you have to spend a week watching football in a country that is not the United States drinking Guinness. I mean, seems like a pretty good 7 days on my end. And then to play the Packers, I think is perfect. That just adds to the history of everything that's going on with another historic and very good franchise. I think it's pretty cool. I would expect it to happen. I would expect Dublin to be awesome. And anybody going over there wants to get a Guinness, you just let me know.
Yeah, obviously, whenever you talk about international games, it's kind of a weird scenario where back-to-back years, the Steelers do things that they don't typically like to do. Hard Knocks this year and an international game next year. It feels like maybe the Roonies are opening up a little bit, but at the same time, I feel like it would have had to be in Ireland. Otherwise, they would have shut it down.
I will say that the Roonies are opening up, air quotes on that one. That they are definitely being forced to open up, which means that after this, it will be very quiet for the Pittsburgh Steelers for as long as they could keep it quiet in Pittsburgh.
Let's move over to something that former Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl winning quarterback had to say yesterday about former first-round quarterback Kenny Pickett. With Pickett starting for the Philadelphia Eagles yesterday in their matchup with the Dallas Cowboys, Terry Bradshaw on the Fox pregame show said, quote, "They never should have gotten rid of Pickett," when talking about the Steelers. And then he was asked later if he thought that before the Steelers went on this 3-game losing streak. And he said, "Well, yeah, I was thinking it." So what do you think about Terry Bradshaw saying the Steelers should have kept Kenny Pickett?
Nobody thinks the Steelers should have kept Kenny Pickett. Look, shout out Kenny Pickett. He won a game yesterday. He didn't look bad doing so, but at the same time, he went 10 for 15 for 143 yards and a touchdown. And Tanner McKee threw 2 touchdowns in 4 passes. So you're looking at it going, classic Kenny Pickett, right? I mean, this is a Terry Bradshaw comment. If I've ever heard a Terry Bradshaw comment, to just say something and then get some spark out of it. All respect to Terry Bradshaw, obviously, but nobody's sitting around thinking the Pittsburgh Steelers should have kept Kenny Pickett. Now I'll say this. You should keep Justin Fields. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you should try, because if your plan at the beginning of all this was Kenny Pickett is going to remain on the roster behind Russell Wilson, keep those plans in place if you have the possibility to do so. I don't believe that possibility is very high, but I do think that they should try to make it happen where Justin Fields is still the backup in 2025 and looks like the guy who could be the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Russell Wilson is the now. Even if you agree or disagree that Russell Wilson is the now, it comes down to the Pittsburgh Steelers and their choice to keep him the now. He will be the now, and you have an opportunity to keep that young guy behind it. But no, Kenny Pickett is not a name that I think anybody is sitting around, unless I'm wrong, thinking the Steelers should have kept Kenny Pickett. Do you think the Steelers should have kept Kenny Pickett?
No. I mean, yeah, he looked fine yesterday for a team that has a running back that's on a generational run, an offensive line that's among the best in the league, and one of the best defenses in the league against a Dallas Cowboys team that's already thinking about when their flights take off to go to their first vacation of the offseason. So,
yeah,
no, I don't think yesterday changed anything. I don't think last week changed anything. And I don't think anything I see in the next 15 years will change anything about my belief of whether or not the Steelers should have held on to Kenny Pickett last offseason.
So I will say this, though, and this is a bad stat for the Steelers, my friend. Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett combined for 3 touchdown passes over the weekend. The Pittsburgh Steelers offense combined for 0 touchdown passes this past week, that's a tough one. It's a tough one to swallow. Small sample size, big results. Okay. Small sample size, big results. Bring some questions into place. Russell Wilson is the quarterback now and in the future. Justin Fields hopefully sticks around long enough to be part of the plan moving forward. Kenny Pickett, my friend. Do you think Kenny ever starts in the NFL ever again? Like long term?
I'm not saying there's not a chance, but I think it's unlikely. I think he's a guy that people are going to peg as a backup. And unless there's a, Matt Flynn situation where a team's like, man, there's no quarterbacks in this draft, might as well take a flyer on Kenny. That's the only situation that I could see that happening.
Man, dude, what an example. Did you mean to use Matt Flynn, who got benched for Russell Wilson as the example there?
100%.
That's a good one. I agree. I don't think Kenny ever gets a long-term starting job in the NFL. All right, let's talk some changes for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin said it after the game against the Chiefs that he believes that changes do need to be made. It brought up massive questions about what those changes could be. We obviously have talked about Deshaun Elliott and Patrick Queen and everybody else talking, and I'll say this. We'll start with this one because it leads into the change that I think is possible. I'll highlight first that there is not much change to look at. You can't look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and say, Russ is going to get benched, because let's be realistic with these possible changes. Russ isn't going to get benched, and the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't going to change their quarterback. They aren't going to suddenly find some success at wide receiver outside of George Pickens and a small sample of Calvin Austin. They're not going to all of a sudden start having great success on the offensive line with their third string guard instead of their second string guard, or their backup offensive tackle who was a guard coming into the season, possibly a backup center, is now potentially a backup tackle. That's not going to happen. The Pittsburgh Steelers changes are low because their depth isn't super deep. And to be honest, they're so banged up. They're so hit with injuries. It's so late in the season that the changes are very limited, but I wouldn't say small. I think that there is one change that could be pretty big that makes some sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know how much it changes. I don't know how big the impact is. I don't know if it fixes everything. I will say that as I've gone back and watched some stuff, and I really don't want to call anybody out, because just like the Minka conversation, when we talked about Minka last week, possibly being the guy that people are talking about, I felt like I don't really want to point fingers if there's no fingers to be pointed. I don't want to be wrong. I'm not sitting here in clear and obvious situations. You could say, yep, this is the issue. You have to make that change. And usually those glaring needs, those glaring concerns are very obvious. It's hard when you look at the defense and say, unless it's one-on-one coverage, this is the issue. And in the Pittsburgh Steelers case, it's more so on the defensive side of the football, guys being out of place and you having to guess what guys are out of place because you don't know where guys are supposed to be. You could assume where guys are supposed to be, but you don't know what the play call is, and you don't know exactly where somebody's supposed to be or who is the one messing up in these situations. As I've gone back and watched some film throughout the past couple of days, because even on Christmas vacation, I'm a psychopath and this is what I do. One name has stuck out. Mark Caboli has named that name, and it kind of caught my attention to me going back and saying, is he right? Is he right about this? He says it's Cam Sutton. And again, he doesn't want to point fingers either, but he's mentioned Cam Sutton's name 1 or 2 times already. And I've gone back and looked, and maybe it is. Again, you don't know for certain. You can't sit here and say that is exactly what's going wrong with the Steelers defense. But he might be the one player who consistently feels like he and somebody else are looking at each other like, what just happened there? Why did that go wrong? Luckily for the Pittsburgh Steelers, you made the change to put Cam Sutton as your guy. You can make the change to make Cam Sutton not your guy. And it's probably the easiest change that you can do on the defensive side of the football, pretty much across the board. Now, I don't think Beanie Bishop is a better coverage corner than Cam Sutton. I don't think Beanie Bishop's a better player than Cam Sutton. What I do think is that right now, if one person is bringing your defense down, you have to try something. And maybe that something is playing more Beanie Bishop, who did not play defense against the Kansas City Chiefs, was not on the field defensively one time against Kansas City. Maybe that needs to go back to the way it is. When it comes to Eric Rowe, that would be the other name that everybody tosses out there. Well, what about that guy? I think there's a reason Eric Rowe didn't have a job until he showed back up on the Pittsburgh Steelers practice squad. And I don't think that you could look at him and say, well, last year he played good in a bad defense to help the Steelers make the playoffs. Yeah, he played good in a bad defense. And okay, great. But I don't think that that deserves all the credit to say, well, we should all assume that he's the answer right here. I don't think he is. I think Cam Sutton's a very good player. He's just not in position right now to play, and the Steelers defense is pretty well aware of that. Again, I don't know if Beanie Bishop fixes some things, but I do think that lucky enough, the Steelers have Beanie Bishop, which is a possible solution here. That is, everybody's asking, what's the problem? Who's the guy? I think that is the problem. That is the guy. I don't know if Beanie fixes it, but I do think that if we're going to talk change, that would be one change that I see coming for the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 18.
Yeah, it's very similar to the quarterback conversation that we had last week. The only difference is you're a lot less tied and tethered to Cam Sutton as a third string cornerback versus Russell Wilson as your starting quarterback. Well, you have the veteran. You want him to play because, well, mentally, he's kind of all set. He's ready to go. He can keep everybody at bay. Well, the problem is right now, Cam Sutton's not keeping anything at bay. It looks like he's blowing coverages. It looks like he's kind of lost in communication. And at that point, go to the younger model. Go to the guy who might make the mental mistakes, but you're not expecting him to be 100% when it comes to the communication. You're hoping that his athleticism and his feel and his ability as a younger athlete is going to be able to make up for that. So I agree with you. I think that in this situation, whenever you're looking at one player that, you know, whether it's his fault or not, it's the player that shows up consistently on tape as the guy that's kind of out of position or the guy that's looking like he's blowing coverages. And if that's the case, yeah, you make that change, especially in a Week 18 where, yes, there are implications. Let's not get it twisted. It'd be great if the Steelers could, one, get a home playoff game, or two, avoid going into Baltimore for the second time within a month for the playoffs. But there's enough leeway to where you can make a small change like this to see if it kind of elevates that bar even a little bit going into the playoff scenarios.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You test the waters, you see what's up. That's what you use Week 18 for. That's what the Steelers, and people will go back and say, well, why would you start your guys? Why would you risk injury? Why wouldn't you sit them? You got to figure it out. You know, that's where the Steelers are. They don't have the luxury right now to say this team has solutions. Hey, look at it and say, right now, this team is in a really bad spot. How do we get them out of a really bad spot? How do we fix the things that need to be fixed before we head to Houston or Baltimore, before we have to play a team where if we lose, we're done. Season's over, where we enter the dance. Maybe Beanie is that guy. Maybe you do elevate Eric Rowe for a game and say, screw it. Maybe Joey Porter Jr. gets healthy, which I don't expect him to. And for everything I've heard says and indicates that Joey Porter Jr. is not going to play in Week 18 and might not play in the wild card round, which is huge. But maybe he gets healthy enough, fast enough, where Corey Trice is an option in the slot and you move him inside. I don't know. But what I do know is you got to try something. And if that is your only change possible, it's not the best change available. It's certainly not the, oh man, well, that's the big splash that the Steelers need to fix some things. But maybe you find some success, some more success in those situations. And the defense looked good with Beanie Bishop out there. I mean, it's not like Beanie stinks. It's not like Beanie's been a bad player all season. Beanie has certainly been beat a lot this season, but he's also come up with some big plays and some big moments. He's also had and made enough noise to be a guy that everybody in Pittsburgh knows. Everybody in the fan base is well aware of Beanie Bishop. There's a reason for that. Maybe that's the change that the Pittsburgh Steelers need to make. I would keep an eye on it. I think that that's something that we could see in Week 18 where Beanie is the guy that gets much more playing time than Cam, and the Steelers see if that's the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, the only other change that I could see making, and again, you made the perfect point at the start of this entire segment, is you can't change all that much, between week 17 and week 18, even with the de facto mini bye that they had cooked in there. The only other thing that I would think is try to play the hits a little bit more on offense. They do all these packages where, all right, this time it's Michael Pruitt and Ben Skoranek out there, where 80% of the time we're going to run the ball. But if we pass the ball, one of these guys might leak open because they're not expecting them. No, put your best athletes, put your best players, the guys that have performed this season out there for the majority of the snaps. That's the only thing that I would go to. Van Jefferson needs to have less snaps than Calvin Austin, no matter what. There needs to be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Darnell Washington and Pat Freiermuth need to be 1 and 2 tight end. And literally the only way that Connor Hayward or Michael Pruitt go out is if those players need a blow and you want to run a 2 tight end set. That's the only other thing that I can think of. Do I think they'll do that? No, because I think Arthur Smith likes to kind of galaxy brain his personnel. And I think that's probably going to continue, but simplify it, man. Just put out the best players, the guys that have done the best for you the first 17 weeks. And I think you'll get better plays out of it.
Yeah. What does galaxy brain mean?
Just kind of overthinking it. Maybe if I do this and this, when realistically the answer is right in front of you. It's like, you don't need to go all around the world to find the answer. The answer is right in front of you, and it's play your best players the most.
I love that. I've never heard of that phrase, but I absolutely love it. And I agree with you. I think if the Steelers are going to offensively make any changes, it's just that. Stop trying to do too much. Stop trying to make this thing crazy. Just run. Just play football and get guys into a rhythm and make it work. That's when the Steelers offense was at its best this season, is when you ran the football well and you didn't do anything crazy, and George Pickens went up for deep balls and Pat Freiermuth caught 3 passes over the middle and you tossed it to Darnell Washington every once in a while. That's when it worked the best. That's when it will continue to work the best. What the Steelers cannot do is what they've been doing, which is just sitting around trying to make craziness happen when craziness has not worked one time. All right, let's talk about George Pickens. Chris Adamski of Trib Lives was on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown last night and said this, talking about a Pittsburgh Steelers future, or the Pittsburgh Steelers future, with George Pickens. Quote, "I think there's a chance that a team like the Raiders actually make a lot of sense, comes in and just makes an offer the Steelers can't refuse, or it gets leaked out there in the spring and people start calling. Is George available? Just put that flyer out there and see if those teams make them a high draft pick offer that you almost have to take." I got 2 questions with this one, okay? Because I think the Steelers would consider an offer for George. I don't think that they wouldn't. I think the Steelers would consider an offer for most players not named TJ Watt or Cam Hayward. I mean, why wouldn't you? Why would you look at it and say, George is entering a contract year. He's going to want a lot of money. You're probably going to have to pay him a lot of money. And maybe you could get a pretty good draft pick for a guy that is only 23, going to be 24 years old, and has a pretty bright future instead of having to pay somebody. And then you could replace him with a cheaper option like T. Higgins. What's the baseline for you of a price tag that you do trade George Pickens away for? And is it a realistic price tag where you think a team could call and make that offer for George Pickens?
We've seen some pretty hefty wide receiver trades over the last couple of years, but the problem is so many teams are making these younger wide receivers work. Whereas if they need a number 1 and they don't have a number 1, it's just as likely that you find it in the draft as you are to find it in a trade market or find it on the free agent market. So I think for that reason, you're going to see a price tag probably be a little bit lower than everybody wants. But if I'm the Steelers, I look around and I say, yeah, we wanted Roman Wilson to potentially emerge as a number 2, but we don't know. We have no answers to that question. And the only option we have right now is George Pickens and maybe somebody that we draft. So I think with that in mind, you're looking at nothing shorter of a second round pick, but I think you're hoping for offer you can't refuse territory. That has to be a first, and certainly a first that's within the top 15, top 16 of the first round.
What is the likelihood the Steelers would actually get that?
I think it's unlikely, because I think somebody in that round is just going to look at it and say, well, I mean, we could just draft a wide receiver in the top 16 and he'll be young like Pickens is, and he will be less used than George Pickens is, and he will probably have less off the field issues on record as George Pickens. And again, I'm not saying that's something that would be the biggest indicator or the biggest reasoning, but I think it definitely plays into the conversations, especially.
I agree. I agree and disagree, because I think that the luxury of the George Pickens situation with the Pittsburgh Steelers and is that other teams are almost always ignore the issues. You know, they almost always are like, nah, they're not that big, you know, or over here, we could keep them calm. It's not that big of a deal. We'll be okay. That seems to happen across the board, especially teams that are willing to make splash offers for big, crazy players. You know, the Steelers don't make those big, splashy, crazy offers. Why? Because they're not looking to take on somebody who the team doesn't want for whatever reason. Teams like the Raiders, teams like the Jets, the Titans, the Bears, all those crazy teams, excuse me, that will make those big, crazy offers, they almost always ignore the situation. Antonio Brown for a third round pick, you know, like Antonio Brown was worth a lot, but I don't think he was worth anything at the same time. Why? Because he was throwing stuff off balconies and causing all sorts of issues and not showing up in week 17 when the Steelers needed him to show up in week 17. But the Raiders make the trade, and they're willing to give up a big compensation on that market, because the wide receiver market at that time, you know, Martavis Bryant, another great example where teams are almost always willing to give more and ignore the issues. And it almost always comes back to bite them in the butt, but they all, you know, they do make those mistakes. I agree with you on the first round pick. I think, you know, you get a first round pick for George Pickens, you trade George Pickens, depending on where in that first round it is. But you could fill a need and replace George Pickens with a first round pick. And you don't even have to draft somebody. You can go, because that's, if you're not going to pay George, go pay a guy like T. Higgins. Go get Christian Kirk. Go make those splash offers and sign those guys, and then have 2 first-round picks where you could fill other needs, corner and defensive tackle. Go get a running back if a running back is available. Go add to your offensive line if you need to. There are options, and I think the wide receiver market is going to be, maybe you're not going to walk away with a George Pickens and a T. Higgins if you get rid of George, but you might walk away with a T. Higgins and somebody who is better than what you have right now as a good number 2 and feel okay about the situation. I do think that's a possibility. I think a lot of it is going to come down to, what does the contract negotiation look like between George and the Pittsburgh Steelers? How does that affect things? How quickly does it turn south or sour? How fast is he willing to not show up to OTAs and minicamp and possibly training camp? What does that progression look like? How bad does it get that fast? Because anybody sitting around saying the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to come out here and an offer is going to be made and it's just going to be a smooth negotiation, it's not. TJ Watt had to walk into Art Rooney's office, slam his fist down and say, we're taking the deal because I just want to play football. It took Minkah Fitzpatrick much shorter than anybody else, but still right before training camp to get a deal done. The Steelers are not going to walk in here and say, here's your $30 million, George. Have fun. We're thankful to have you. It's going to be slow, and it's going to work in a way where there is going to be actual negotiations. When those actual negotiations happen, how does George respond to low ball numbers? How does his agent respond to low ball numbers? That will indicate what comes next between the Pittsburgh Steelers and George Pickens. I will say this: the Steelers' first option, their top priority, will be to keep George. Like, we could talk trades all day long. The Steelers' top priority will be to keep George long-term and sign him to a deal. That will be how that goes. But what happens between the first contract offer and the last, that's totally up for debate and something we will have no idea what happens until it actually starts to happen. And that's when these hypotheticals, like Adamski tosses in here, could actually go down to the point where the Pittsburgh Steelers might say, all right, let's just see what the price tag is for George Pickens. And let's just see if we could send him somewhere who would be very open to a wide receiver. And what helps that situation, I'll end with this: there aren't enough quarterbacks in this draft to say we're staying put for a quarterback. There's 2 first-round quarterbacks that are locks. Everybody else is fringe first-round quarterback, possibly a second-round quarterback. It's not a very deep quarterback draft. And because of that, you're going to get a lot of teams that are sitting there going, why would we sit here and not trade this pick away so that we draft what? A tackle or a defensive lineman or a linebacker or a corner? No, let's go get George Pickens. He's a proven commodity. He's a star. Let's go get him, because that's going to help our quarterback of the future whenever we do get a quarterback of the future, because it won't be in this year's draft. I think that does certainly help the Steelers' favor. But again, top priority will be to sign George Pickens in the offseason. Will it happen? I don't know. You gotta. What's your likelihood the Steelers sign George Pickens compared to trading him?
I would think it's more than likely that they end up signing Pickens. I mean, they see the talent and the value that he has there. And while, yes, you can make the argument that you trade up, you get an earlier draft pick, and maybe you end up with, T. Higgins and Tedorota McMillan out of Arizona State. Yeah, that's great. Or Arizona, I can't remember which one he goes to, but that's great. Or you could have George Pickens wait a little bit, and if you want that wide receiver, and if you're desperate for that other wide receiver, you just get a Mecca Ibuka a little bit later on. I mean, either way, you're in a much better position than you are now. But I think George Pickens is younger. He has less of an injury history, and I think the Steelers are going to like the guy that they already have in the building and know what he is and know what that he can be, and they're going to stick with him.
I agree. If I had to put my odds on this, George Pickens remains in Pittsburgh, a deal that is roughly $30 million a year, which you could agree or disagree with that number. But I would say that's where the Pittsburgh Steelers offense and wide receiver situation is headed. All right. That's everything on my agenda today, which means that we're tossing it over to you guys. If you got questions, please toss them in the chat. We'll answer all of them before we head out of here. We'll end the show the same way we do every day. Nick, with that said, what do we got?
Yeah, let's kick things off with Marlon Lewis, who says, for the sake of arguing, say the Steelers lose the next 2 games. No one outside of Terrell Austin is at risk of being changed, correct?
Terrell Austin is also not at risk of being changed. Let's just make that clear. Terrell Austin is signed through 2025. Matt Canada was a prime example of how bad it actually needs to get before a change could happen. And Terrell Austin and that defense is nowhere close to where Matt Canada and that offense was. I would say nobody is at risk of being changed. Pat Meyer might be at risk of being changed simply because the Steelers' offensive line is really not in a good place, and Broderick Jones has gone backwards, and I think it brings up a lot of questions there. But you're not going to look at the outside linebacker coach. You're not going to look at Carl Dunbar. You're not going to look at Grady Brown. You're just going to look at, especially with Corey Trice playing well against Kansas City and Joey Porter Jr. being Joey Porter Jr., you're not getting rid of Grady Brown. You're not getting rid of Zach Kazani. You're not getting rid of Tom Arth. I would say everybody, including TA, is in a pretty good spot where we stand heading into 2025. I don't expect any changes to the Steelers coaching staff. Maybe Eddie Faulkner, because it's kind of at that point where those guys do make some changes. And then I don't expect Mike Sullivan to be back. But even Eddie, I think it's a very, very low chance that he's not there in 2025.
Let's head on over to Matt, who says, is it true that the NFL has a rule that after week 14, there's no tackling or pads in practice? Just something that I heard.
I don't know what the exact week is, but yes, at some point during the season, the NFL stops padded practices. You only get a certain number of them throughout the season. You're only allowed to utilize a certain number of them. It's to keep players safe and healthy and not push things, especially later in the season with the season expanding. I don't know what the exact week is. I do know there's like a certain number that you have to get to. Once you get to that threshold, you can't have padded practice anymore.
Let's go to J Chap's snack review, who says, any news on Joey Porter Jr.?
I don't expect Joey Porter Jr. to play this week. From what I have been told, what others have reported, Joey Porter is not expected to play against the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll see if that changes, but as of right now, I don't expect Joey to be on the field. I don't know if he'll even be on the field in the wild card round due to the significance of the injury. So we'll see what happens. Right now, it's Corey Trice and Dante Jackson. I think it's more concerning for Dante Jackson. Corey Trice played kind of well against Kansas City. I don't know if he'll play well against Joe Burrow, but we'll see if he does.
Let's go over to Demetrius, who says, funny, Seattle and Denver's O-lines got better after Russell Wilson left with the same players. Is that a coincidence?
No, I don't think so. I think that Denver's offensive line did get better here. I think that Russ does get himself sacked quite a bit. I do think that. I definitely think that. I also think that the Steelers' offensive line is terrible. So those could go hand in hand. Those could be the same argument or two totally different arguments, however you want to word it. But I think Russ is forcing things and taking way too long in the pocket and then doing things like circling to the left to try to escape. Gives you Kenny Pickett flashbacks. But at the same time, there are a lot of sacks where that offensive line looks atrocious, and they should be atrocious. I mean, they have a 4th-round rookie starting at guard and a 2nd-round rookie starting at center, and a guy that got benched in week 2 starting at right tackle. Like, it's not a good offensive line on paper. It shouldn't be a good offensive line on the field. They have the pieces to develop into something, but I do think that the offensive line is playing just as big of a role. Russ is getting himself sacked. Let's not act like he's not. He's definitely he looks like an old man out there. When the pressure gets there after 3 or 4 seconds, he's stumbling backwards like he needs a walker. But I think it goes both ways. I don't think it's all Russ. I don't think it's all the offensive line. Also, Denver's offensive line looks good. Seattle's offensive line as a whole looks terrible.
Let's go over to Beaston88, who says over-under on the Bengals scoring 40 points this week. I'm taking the over.
I would take the over as well. I think I think the Steelers' defense is very alarming. The Bengals look really good right now. Like, I was told, I was having conversations over the weekend with people, and they were saying, if the Bengals make the playoffs, man, I wouldn't be surprised if they went on a run. And I was like, I can't really argue that. I can't argue for it, but I can't argue against it. I would say the Steelers need to score at least 40 points against Cincinnati to win this ballgame. I agree.
Let's jump down to Eddie the Great. Appreciate you as always. Eddie says, Noah and Nick, what do we got to do to get out of football purgatory? When did not having a losing season become the standard? Will the Rooneys rescue us from Tomlin's hubris? This team is turning into Dallas.
I look at it's hard to disagree. I think we've hit the point in just like his tenure where if Mike Tomlin doesn't go on a run this playoffs, like a real run, not win a playoff game, but go on a run, look like a competitor, then this is, I don't know, maybe the end of feeling like Mike Tomlin is a great head coach, at least where he stands right now. Maybe needs change of scenery. Who knows what's going on there? Maybe it's just too early in Omar Khan's run to put anything out there and say, this is a good team. Maybe there are too many holes. Maybe the offensive line isn't enough. Maybe you really do need a wide receiver. Maybe it is you need a good quarterback to be a good team, because the teams with good quarterbacks are good teams. I think there are a lot of questions out there that you have to answer that we don't really have answers to. You're just kind of assuming, guessing, putting your opinion out there. Art Rooney will never fire Mike Tomlin. That's where we start this conversation, is that will never happen in a million years. Mike Tomlin leaves when Mike Tomlin wants to leave. I don't know if the team's turning into Dallas, but I do think that the Pittsburgh Steelers need to give somebody some hope, give some people some hope relatively soon before this team overall just becomes they are not real no matter how good they look at any point during the season team, which they are definitely turning into rather quickly.
Let's jump to John Burnett, who says, don't want to be negative, but the road to the Super Bowl goes through either Kansas City or Buffalo, maybe both. Do you think we stand a chance against either, and who would you rather play?
I'd rather play Kansas City, as crazy as that sounds. I don't think the Steelers are competitors with either of them where we stand currently. That could change. You know, I'm not going to, if the Steelers defense figures it out, I think you could compete with Kansas City. I think you could compete with Buffalo. I think you could compete with Baltimore, who's a really big sleeper right now at this point in the season. I don't know if I would classify the Steelers as a real contender compared to either of these teams, not after a 3-game stretch that we just saw. But that could change, and it has the possibility to change. I don't know. I would rather play Kansas City. I think you're probably going to have to play Buffalo. No, you're going to go to Kansas City. So unless LA or either Denver or Cincinnati wins their playoff game, their first round playoff game. The Steelers will go to Cincinnati or to Kansas City, excuse me. And I don't feel good about going to Arrowhead to win a football game in January. That's probably the most difficult thing you could do in the NFL.
Let's go back to Marlon, who says, if we were to lose out, do you think Mr. Rooney could make the decision to go with Justin for the future?
I do think Mr. Rooney could have some input on where things go. I don't know if he'd have enough input or really have a strong enough opinion to say Justin has to be the future. He tries very hard to stay out of these decisions. So I would give the chances of that as almost zero, but not zero. I think it's really tough to sit here and say Russ is not going to be the guy next season. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying I think it's very difficult to have the thought in your head or come up and justify that the Steelers are going to go with Justin.
Let's jump to Pittsburgh Hornets, who says, if we lose to the Bengals, do you expect bigger changes going into the wild card round?
I just don't know what the changes could be. That's the only problem, is what could the changes possibly be? You've already kind of made the switch at running back to where Jaylen Warren is there. You don't have any depth anywhere. You can't make a change on the defensive line. You can't make a change on the offensive line. You can't make a change at wide receiver. You can't make a change. I mean, you could make a change at quarterback, but that's the last thing you're going to change. And it would have to be abundantly clear that Russ just lost you the game against Cincinnati and he's a massive problem, which I don't think the Steelers are going to view him as that. I just don't know if the options are there. I don't know if the Steelers have the options to make any other change outside of Cam Sutton for Beanie Bishop. I just don't. Maybe Corey Trice and Joey Porter get the start over Dante Jackson, but there's just almost nothing to actually change for the Steelers.
Let's go to Cecil, who says, Noah and Nick, be honest, does it feel like one and done again to you guys in the playoffs?
No, I think they're going to beat the Houston Texans. I do. I think they're going to beat Houston, go to Kansas City. We'll see what happens there. But I don't feel like this is a one and done in the playoffs. I think the Steelers pull off a win in the playoffs against the Houston Texans. That would be my guess right now, or my prediction. And then you go to Kansas City, and if I'm going to be very honest, I think that they get smoked. But I don't think this is a one and done.
And here's the thing, too. Even if they end up going to Baltimore, even if they end up hosting LA, I still give them a chance against any of those teams. I understand that right now they're on a bad 3-game losing streak, but you're never as bad as it seems on a losing streak, and you're also never as good as it seems on a winning streak. So yes. I think that's going to level itself out come playoff time, and I think they'll have a chance. But again, you can't continue to make the mistakes you've been making in recent weeks and expect to perform in the playoffs. I do give them a chance going in, though, to have an opportunity against any of those three teams.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Now, winning with Bailey Zappi at your quarterback, I don't think the Browns give them much of a chance to beat the Ravens, but I do think I agree with you. I think you could beat Houston. I definitely think you could beat LA. I think Baltimore would be really tough because I think Baltimore is red hot right now, but it's Baltimore. So any AFC North team, I'd give the Pittsburgh Steelers a shot over.
Let's go over to Marlon, who says, Nick and Noah, when evaluating Arthur Smith, do you look at how creative he was at times with Justin and how bad he is with Russ?
So that's tough because I don't think Arthur Smith was creative at all with Justin Fields. I think that his playbook was really, really bland and almost super vanilla. We talked on the show a number of times about how it feels like Arthur Smith was holding back because his offense was designed for Russell Wilson and he was just trying to filler it for Justin Fields. I don't think Arthur Smith's offense was creative with Justin. I mean, there were moments like you had the really stupid reverse that didn't work where 20 minutes later, the Detroit Lions made it look like it was the greatest play in football history. But I think that they're doing more with Russ. It's just not working. I don't evaluate Arthur Smith and say this is a good season. I would say it's had very good moments. It's also had very bad moments. The inconsistency when it comes to adjustments is wild. I would say that. You want to talk Justin Fields compared to Russell Wilson, the adjustments that Arthur Smith made in games when Justin Fields was the quarterback were much more significant and worked 10 times more than they're working now and are happening 10 times more than they're happening now. So I would say, yeah, I would put that in there. And I felt confident in who Arthur Smith was as a head coach and those adjustments that could be made. I don't feel as confident right now. Not saying that he's a bad offensive coordinator. I don't think he is. I just think that if we're going to evaluate him like that and compare the two, that would be my biggest comparison.
While we're talking about Arthur Smith, let's go down to Potato Salad, who says, if the Steelers were to re-sign Justin Fields, do you see Arthur Smith adjusting his playbook this offseason to line up better with his play style? Can't see the play calling we had in weeks 1 to 6 working week 14 and on.
Yeah, I do. I think that if you got a full offseason, because that was the thing is Justin Fields came in here. He was not supposed to even touch the field in Pittsburgh. He would never be part of the Pittsburgh Steelers offense in 2024. He got a couple of starts. He looked really good. The Steelers said, you got to keep this guy on the field. You can't take him off the field, even if Russ is supposed to be our starting quarterback. So you had to adjust to that. I think if you get a full offseason of trying to incorporate Justin Fields into the offense, you get a much better product for Justin Fields and what the Steelers offense can do with him. So my answer would be yes. I also think that if you got Russell Wilson for a full offseason and a new running game and better wide receivers and a better offensive line, that your product on the field is much better. You know, that's the one thing. The Steelers didn't get a summer with Russell Wilson. He was injured the entire time. They were working with Justin Fields, developing an offense to just guess that it will work with Russ. You get to change that. You get a full summer to figure that out. I think it looks much different.
Let's go to the short term when it comes to Arthur Smith. Nate Moore wants to know, will Arthur Smith open up the playbook this weekend? Tired of watching run, pass, only quick outs and go routes all the time. Our offense is so bland and basic that all of our opponents already know it.
Yeah, it is a pretty basic and bland offense. I do agree with that. I don't think that he opens it up more. Maybe. And there were a lot of different things against Kansas City that worked well that hopefully continue to be utilized. I don't know if they will, but hopefully continue to be utilized. That, you know, Pat Freiermuth got more involved. You saw different running schemes, which I thought helped a lot when it came to Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. You saw it the last time you played Cincinnati, where the Steelers offense looked much different and was designed much differently than it has been the rest of the season, but that went away rather quickly. So I think Cincinnati opens the door for changes. I don't ever expect them, but Cincinnati's defense allows you to do a lot more dump offs, a lot more utilize the short middle of the field, which is very successful in the NFL if you could do it properly. And I think Cincinnati's defense is very weak there to the point where you could take advantage of it.
Let's skip down to Red Hot Chili Peppers fan. Appreciate you as always. Says, what are the chances of acquiring Drake May or another quarterback that's currently in the league?
Drake May will not leave the New England Patriots until he forces himself out of the New England Patriots because they just lose that much. He is phenomenal. Drake May is a stud. Actually, I very much so enjoy watching him. Another quarterback that I don't think the options are out there. This is not a quarterback deep league right now. The quarterbacks in the NFL are few and far apart. You got Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, I guess CJ Stroud, and then a couple in the NFC. That's like it. You got a couple of good rookies, but Michael Penix doesn't look that good. Drake May looks great. Jaden Daniels looks great. And Bo Nix looks pretty good. That's it. Like, it is not a quarterback heavy league. There aren't these just dozens and dozens of great quality quarterbacks out there. I mean, you're going to get teams that are making phone calls for Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins isn't good anymore. Trying to figure something out. Justin Fields is going to get an opportunity to do something as a starter next season, I believe. And I mean, a year ago, he's getting traded for a 6th round pick to be a backup. So I don't think the options are out there for the Steelers to actually go and get somebody.
Let's skip to Shady602, who says, would Fields be better in the playoffs than Russell Wilson right now?
I mean, I am on the side of the argument that says that you put Justin Fields in and you see what you get. I don't know if he'd be better. I'm not going to assume that he would be. But I do think that he brings more to the table where you can make more out of nothing. And right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers don't have anything. And that was the argument when he got benched is the Steelers don't have anything. Justin Fields makes more out of nothing. Okay, well, Russ was making a lot out of nothing. Now he's making very little out of nothing. So I personally think Justin Fields is a better option right now. Will it happen? No.
Let's go over to Roger, who says, if they don't re-sign Najee Harris, is Jalen Warren ready to be a running back one?
I don't think he's ready to be the bell cow. You get 30 touches a game running back. I think he's too tiny and he's got some fumble issues. But I do think that he could be a consistent 15 carries a game running back where he splits that with somebody else who consistently gets 15 carries a game. I mean, you look at the best games the Steelers running backs have had outside of Najee Harris's 3 100-yard games. It's Jalen getting 13, 14 carries and Najee getting 15, 16. That's when it works the best. And that's what the Steelers should be doing. I think that's what's going to happen next year is Jalen will be technically the running back one, and he'll get about 15 carries a game. And then whoever the running back two is, which will probably be a rookie, will get about 15 carries a game.
Let's jump to Potato Salad, who says, Broderick Jones is always there to make the block, but his hips never drop. Darnell got embarrassed on the same blocking move 3 times. Is the offensive line coach on the hot seat at all?
I do think he is. I defended Pat Meyer for a long time, and I still think Pat Meyer is a good coach. But if you're going to make any coaching staff change, if you're going to look at this downfall and put it on anybody and say this is where the issues are, you could probably make an argument that it's the offensive line. I mean, outside of Mike Tomlin, like that's where you can make the argument. Now, the argument for him is Broderick Jones came in really raw, but again, against him is why hasn't he developed? And you're dealing with 2 other rookies. So what's going on there? I do think Pat Meyer is on the hot seat. I don't know how hot it is, but if you had to create your list of possible coaching changes, he's pretty high on that list.
Let's jump to Pittsburgh Hornets, who says, does Russell Wilson fit what our offensive line can handle right now? Wouldn't Fields be better suited to protect behind this line?
I don't even know if protect would be the right word. I just look at it and say all those times where Russell Wilson does the little spin to the left and gets sacked thing, Justin's getting a first down. Like that's how I look at it. Is there are a lot of moments where Russ just doesn't have time to do anything and the wide receivers aren't good enough to get open and he needs to figure something out where Justin's just going to take off and get a couple of yards. And that's better than nothing. It's better than getting sacked every single time. I think the O-line is an issue, but having a quarterback who could do what Justin does helps with that issue. It doesn't make it better. It just helps.
Let's jump over to another question from Pittsburgh Hornets, who says, what would you pay Russell Wilson if you had to sign him today for 2025?
What would I pay him? What would they pay him? I would pay him $20 million a year, max. I would not pay Russell Wilson much. I'd look at it and say, give me an easy out, and here's a 2-year deal worth $45 million. That's what I would look at it. Now, there's a difference between what you're worth and what you're valued at, and the Steelers are going to have to value Russell Wilson a lot higher than that because somebody's going to pay him. So chances are Russ gets $40 million a year next season from the Steelers or somebody else. 3-year, $100 million deal where a lot of stuff's backloaded and you get an easy out in the 3rd year or something like that. But I would say he's getting probably about $35-40 million from the Steelers in 2025.
Let's go over to Jeff, who says, could we see a scenario where they extend Fields for 2 years, draft a legit quarterback prospect, aka Drew Aller, out of Penn State, according to Jeff, in a couple of years and let Russell Wilson walk?
I can, just to be very honest with you, I can't see that scenario. I don't see that scenario with the Steelers. I think that scenario is a decent scenario. It could work out well for the Steelers. But if we're just talking realistic, no, I don't see that being a scenario for the Steelers. I could see the Steelers drafting a guy like Drew Aller next season, unless he goes like 1st overall. But I believe Russ is already the guy in 2025 and 2026 and probably 2027. Justin's going to be somewhere else.
Let's go to Dave, who says, draft the kid from Syracuse. He's a beast, in my opinion, better than both Ward and Sanders. Ooh. So are you in on Kyle McCord out of Syracuse? I like Kyle McCord. I do think Kyle McCord's good. Better than Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I don't know about that one. I'm worried about Shedeur Sanders for different reasons other than his ability to play football. Cam Ward, I think, got a bad rep for his Pop-Tart Bowl thing. It's the Pop-Tart Bowl, man. You're playing for a toaster. Don't play the game.
You're going to be top 5 quarterback. Don't play the game. I don't disagree with them on there. Maybe, dude. Maybe McCord's good. Maybe he's an option for the Steelers later. I don't think he's going to go first round. He might go first round, but I don't. I think the first round quarterbacks are super up in the air right now when it comes to that back half of the first round, because I just don't see anybody who's solidified outside of those two guys. The Steelers could think about it. They have other options, or they have other situations and positions they need to fill, which is going to stop them. But I don't know if I agree with it, but I do like him. I do like McCord.
I mean, he did put up massive numbers on a bottom half ACC team, but we saw what happened when he was on a top half Big Ten team, and it didn't look good. So I don't know what to think about Kyle McCord. I think he's probably, the truth is somewhere in the middle there. It's not as good as he was this year. Probably not as bad as he was last year at Ohio State.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely not that.
Let's go over to Ernie, who says, question for Noah and Nick. I've been reading that Russ is about retirement. What do you guys think?
I don't know where you're reading that. I would stop reading wherever you're reading that. I don't think Russ is considering retirement. He said to me and to many others that he wants to play 4 or 5 more years minimum. He's still got like deep NFL aspirations. So I don't see Russ retiring this season. Even if they win a Super Bowl, I don't see Russ retiring. I think I did at one point. Nick convinced me otherwise, but I just think he's here for a while.
Let's jump down to Potato Salad, who is always on his game. Says, we appreciate you guys. F the Ratbirds and the, well, he says bungholes.
Yeah. Shout out Potato Salad.
Let's finish it off with the GOAT, who says, all Steelers talk. I'm going to Pittsburgh for the first time to see the Bengals game for my 21st birthday. Anything I should do/eat while I'm up there?
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely hit the Strip District. That's our go-to every single time. If you're going for your 21st birthday, man, go and enjoy the North Shore before the game. It's a good time. Hit some bars, hit some tailgates. I think it's a blast over there. The black and gold tailgate, I'll ask. You should go look up the boys over at around the 412. They typically are involved with some good tailgates that you could buy tickets to. That's a good time as well. Nick's got the food though, but go to Permanis. Go to Permanis, and Nick will give you some other options.
Yeah, Permanis is a good option if you have never had it. Obviously, the people that have had it a lot are going to say it's overrated simply because they've had it a lot. But it's good if you haven't had it before. I like Pepe's in the Strip District. I think that's probably the best sandwich shop in Pittsburgh, to be completely honest. So I'd go there if I were you. Plus, the Strip District is a cool little area where you can get some cheap Steelers gear that is not authentic, but still nice gear.
Yeah, it's definitely fake, but it's it's cool. Like, you got to go to the Strip District. Nobody complains about going to the Strip District.
Let's go and finish this one off actually with J Chaps Snacks Review, who says, do you consider the season as of right now a success or a failure?
I would consider the season right now as expected. That's what I would consider the season. You go back, you go through the record prediction, you go through game by game, and 6 months ago, we are sitting here saying the Pittsburgh Steelers are 10-6, or maybe 9-7, or at this point in the season. And they lose 3 games in a row. Boom, boom, boom. Maybe they beat Baltimore, but they lose to Baltimore last time. Who knows? But I think that right now I would just consider this season as expected. I don't know if I would consider that a success or a failure. I think a lot of it comes down to what happens in the playoffs. Who cares about Cincinnati? You got to beat Cincinnati, obviously. Like, you lose to Cincinnati, things just look disastrous, and I don't know how far this thing could spiral, or how quickly it could spiral, or how bad you could look against whoever in the playoffs. You beat a team like Houston in the playoffs. You beat a team like Baltimore in the playoffs. You're looking at it going, okay, you won one. You got to the second round. You win another game in the playoffs somehow. Massive success. This season's a success. Check it off as Steelers took a big step forward in 2024 compared to 2023. I think it's too early to judge if it's a success or a failure. I'll just say that right now it's as expected with the Steelers in their current position.
This season, even if you go all the way back to when we were talking about Darius Rush being the OTA MVP through week 1, at that point, this season was being judged based on, did you win a playoff game or not? I think that still remains true to this day.
Yes, I agree. That's where we will judge it. And depending on how that playoff game looks, I think that's how we'll judge it. So
That's a wrap for today then.
Awesome. With that said, guys, we are heading out of here. Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, find all of our work at si.com/NFL/Steelers. We will be back tomorrow. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.